Hotel and welcome. Comedic legacy today. Comedic legacy today. Life, health, and strength to you all. Comedic legacy today. Hotel. Comedic legacy today.
Hetepu. Welcome to Comedic Legacy Today, your weekly journal of ancient African, ancient Kemetic history and spirituality. My name is Jabari Osaze, also known as Heru Jedin Ma'at Atenra.
And my name is Anika Daniels Osaze, also known as Nferka Ma'at.
Today we're going to continue our series on the maxims of Ptahhotep. You may remember that in our earlier episode, we actually began discussing these very important precepts on how to live a divine life that come to us after, they come to us down approximately 4,400 years, I guess. It's a very long period of time that these maxims were written. And you'll find that they are extremely, extremely insightful. And we believe that focusing on them, even in this modern contemporary society, will allow us to find ways to return to Ma'at. Ma'at being known as this balance of the universe, the order of the universe that we must find ourselves in harmony with in order to be able to truly live a divine life. And so this is what we're attempting to do today. We're going to focus on the second section of the Maxims of Ptahhotep.
Okay, so should we jump right into...
Well, we should say, just for folks who are not familiar, that if you're not familiar with the Maxims of Ptahhotep, you might see them under Instructions of Ptahhotep. You should also look, if you don't find that name for it, it's also called the Priest's Papyrus. And the reason why it's called the Priest's Papyrus is because a Frenchman purchased this papyrus in the 1840s from a dealer someplace around the area of what's modern-day Luxor today. And he brings it back to France, and the most complete version of it, the complete version of it, is still in France's National Library. And so that is what you should be looking for if you're interested. Keep in mind that we won't call it the Priest's Papyrus here. It should be named the Maxims or the Instructions of Ptahhotep. And we also mentioned last time that the Kamites called this genre of critical literature the Sebayit, which is sort of the teachings or the maxims. And this particular set is what generally makes up the oldest complete book in the entire world. It is very, very important to the entire development of higher wisdom and higher thinking for all of humanity. I would even argue that it is the beginning of philosophy. And so it's critically important that we focus on this.
And of course, this is important for us having our own center and shrine to Ma'at, that this is something that all of our initiates would have to learn and try to live by, and something that they can teach others through counsel. So anyone who's part of the shrine, or anyone who considers themselves to be an initiate, has to understand each of these maxims and try to practice it in their daily lives while helping others learn it as well.
That's right. That's right. And you know that this show is produced by the Center for the Restoration of Ma'at. Very soon, the Shrine of Ma'at will be coming forward. So the center will be sort of our public relations and educational arm, and the shrine will be truly for those who are looking to take this understanding of ancient Kemet further into their spiritual lives. And so Anika's referencing the forthcoming Shrine of Ma'at. We're right on the cusp of its initiation, and certainly the folks who are watching at home at Comedic Legacy Today will probably also have an opportunity to see our Ankh ceremony, which is upcoming as well. And so those are all things that we're thinking about as we sit here and bring this divine teaching of our ancestor Ptahhotep to you as well.
Okay, so today's episode we will start with maxim number 9. on the silence necessary to the fortunate and the happy fate of the childless. If you plow your field, and thanks to the intervention, your harvest is abundant, don't boast about it to your neighbors, for it is the quiet man who inspires respect. As for the man who stays self-possessed despite great riches, in a court of law he will know how to win a case with the swiftness of a crocodile. Don't blame or criticize those who have no children, nor boast about your offspring. There are many unhappy fathers, and as many unhappy mothers. A woman without children is more serene. The Unter grants spiritual growth to the solitary, whereas the head of the family clan prays anxiously to find a successor.
Very, very interesting maxim, Maxim 9, where he begins by discussing folks, I guess, that speak overmuch. Mm-hmm. Today, in our communities, they might say, these are folks who are flossing. These are folks who have something, maybe even just a little bit, and they want everyone to know that they've arrived. They want everyone to know that they actually have accumulated some items. Mm-hmm. So these are the folks that drive down the street in the shiny new car and make sure they have all the jewels all over them. Their teeth have jewels. Everything has jewels. They are actually showing everyone that they've accumulated some material. And I think that in our community, in the African American and African communities, it's probably even more challenging because for such a long time, we were the means mm-hmm. of the accumulation of wealth. Mm-hmm. And so our bodies were actually what was used to accumulate wealth. So now that we are supposedly free, I should say, many of us have taken to showing these outward signs of having made it. And so it's a challenge for him to say to us that we need to actually be a little bit more careful about what we're showing. Mm-hmm. We need to make sure that people aren't thinking that we have so much, mm-hmm. and that those who have little actually should look almost similar to those who have a lot. I think that's very interesting.
Actually, to some extent, it seems as if he's saying that those who have little could, to some extent, be happier because they've learned how to work with the little that they have, and they're not expecting that much more. Mm-hmm. So when you learn to use what you have, you can always be happy because you realize that you can acquire much more, but you probably don't need it.
Right, mm-hmm. right. He also talks about the childless here.
Yeah.
And talks about the fact that there are those who have children that brag constantly. Mm-hmm. Clearly, he's talking about children as something that is a blessed event, something that most people are very pleased with, but he's cautioning those of us who are able to have children and then are looking at those who do not have children as something less than they are. And so he says, listen, be sure that if you are fortunate enough to have children, that you're not bragging constantly about having children, and that you recognize that the childless also have a wonderful lot in life as well. And so I think that that's also very interesting as well. All the things that you have, all the fruits of your labor should not be those things that you use to look down upon others, is essentially what he's saying. And so I think that that's also a very divine fact.
Yeah. Okay. So now we'll move to maxim number 10. On the importance of placing your trust in a person of quality. If you are weak, follow a man of quality worthy of your trust, and your behavior will find favor with the Unter. Don't worry whether he came from a humble background, nor think less of him for anything you may learn about his past. Respect him for what has happened to him, for success does not come at random, but depends on divine laws that favor those by the Unter's love. What a man of quality has acquired, he has acquired through his own spirit. The Unter made him thus, and protects him even in his sleep.
What are your thoughts about this one here?
To be honest, I think there's several things that are being said here. That not only should you look to someone who probably has greater understanding than you to be able to draw your own knowledge, but even work within your own limitations to understand that there's more that you need to acquire, and in order to do so, look to those who may have already achieved some of what you need.
Right. I think he's really talking, like you're saying, much about being humble and learning that there's much that you can learn from people who have great wisdom. And great wisdom should not be measured by those who have a lot, once again. Often when people discuss ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, they continually focus on the idea that they had these very opulent burials, that royal people had all this, had accumulated all this wealth. Sometimes you'll even hear people say that ancient Kemetic spirituality is something that was almost restricted to the wealthy. And I challenge them at every step of the way, because I really believe that there's absolutely nothing in our understanding of the history of ancient Kemet that supports that understanding. I think that we can become over-focused on what wealthy people did, simply because we have their tombs. We are able to see, well, some of them, we're able to see some of the things that they left behind. And I think that when we look at these wonderful pieces of literature that come out of this great Sebayit tradition, we begin to see that the most intelligent, the wisest people in this society are people who did not look down on folks who did not have a very high lot in life. And I think that that's very powerful as well. So he's saying that wise people, once again, can come from humble backgrounds, and that should not be something that concerns you. Remember that this is very similar to, I believe, Maxim 1, where he talks about some of the greatest wisdom coming from women that are working at the grindstone. This is also, once again, another commentary on finding wisdom where it is. It doesn't necessarily come from people who have large amounts of education or have accumulated much or have come from royal families, but it could come from people who are doing menial work. And so I think that it's really important for us to recognize that wisdom is just that. It's something that you acquire through careful work on your person. It's not about what you're able to spend on your person. And so once again, I think that this is very powerful.
Great. Maxim 11. On the need to follow your heart and not squander your energy on practical tasks. Follow your heart, your conscience, and your ka, your creative power, all your life. Do what has to be done, but not to excess. Don't cut short the time spent on spiritual life. Wasting time is an abomination of the ka. Do not pervert the course of day-to-day life by spending too long on mundane tasks. Whatever happens, follow your heart and your conscience. Things don't work out well for those who are lazy and negligent.
Once again, I think that he's seems to be talking about the importance of doing work on you. And the importance of ensuring that you're not simply waiting for something magnificent to take place, but that the path to spiritual development is one that you have to work at. It takes discipline, it takes ritual, it takes diet, it takes prayer. Those are the sorts of things that you would hear in Kemetic spirituality, and I think that's what he's referring to again. He talks about laziness being the abomination of the soul, of the ka. That is very, very powerful. As we think about all the things that we do on a daily basis, how many of them are oriented towards our spiritual development? And I think he's challenging me too. I mean, as someone who is preparing to become a Kemetic priest, who is at the helm of the Center for the Restoration of Ma'at, you know, I'm sure that Anika would tell you that there's some days that she would challenge me on what I've done for my spiritual development. It's something that we all have to think about and take as a personal critique. And as we bring forth our organization, make sure that we are able to every day make sure that we're working on our spirit.
I also interpret it as some people who choose not to focus on self and find anything else to occupy their time so that they don't have to worry about who they really are. And I think a lot of us choose to do that. It's easier to not think about the things in your life that you need to change or the aspects of your personality that need improvement. So instead of focusing on those areas, you find other chores and tasks that can occupy your mind so you don't have to think about it.
That's right. Yeah. It's important that the path to spiritual development takes work. It's not easy. I'm always reminded of the glyph for love and the fact that the glyph for love in ancient Kemetic language, in Medu Neter, is actually the hoe. And I know that for those of us who have had to ever hoe land, you can really appreciate how difficult it is without a tractor or some other tiller. You actually have to get into the ground and break it up, and it takes a lot of work, and that is also the symbol for love. So I think it's divine that, once again, the Kamites are telling us that good things come to those who work. Not those who wait.
For those who work.
Those who work. So that's very powerful to me as well.
Good. Okay. Maxim 12, on behavior towards a spiritual son. If you are a man of quality one can trust, may you, with the help of the Unter, initiate a spiritual son. If he is of upright character, if he follows your example, listens to your teaching, if his way of acting proves efficient in your domain, and he takes good care of your possessions, then grant him all kinds of blessings. He is indeed your spiritual son. He is of the same nature as your Ka, your creative power. Hold him dear to your heart. But a man's seed can engender conflict. If your son takes the wrong track, ignores your advice, doesn't follow your teaching, behaves atrociously in your house, insolently disobeys your orders and takes back rudely, then send him away. He is not your spiritual son. If he is hostile to you, set him to work so that he may completely correct his way of thinking. He will incur the Unter's disfavor. Some barrier was set up during his development. Those whom the Unter guide cannot go astray, but those denied safe passage cannot easily navigate the river of life.
I had to sit and take that in for a moment. There's so many of us who go through life without a mentor. We call them mentors today, and I'm not sure if everyone really thinks about what that means to be a mentor, but he's talking about someone who has acquired spiritual wisdom, and that person sharing that wisdom with someone who is younger, but clearly is someone who is like them. He talks about them being similar in their Ka. And so I think that that's very important, once again, for us to make sure that we find people who can put us on the right path, who can assist us with our work, who can tell us what we need to hear, even though it may not be what we want to hear. He even talks about that spiritual mentor being so strict with you that if you are not doing what you're supposed to be doing, that sometimes you need to be sent away. And that if you're not doing what you have to do, then maybe you need to set them back on the right course, so that that person can develop the way that they are supposed to. Once again, we're hearing more about work towards spiritual significance. It's not just simply something that you sort of achieve, but you have to work at it. And the work is what will get us to where we want to go.
Maxim 13, on the proper attitude in a court of justice. If you find yourself in a court of justice, stand or sit according to the procedure laid down on the first day. Do not force your way through, or you will be thrown out. Wait until you're announced, then come into the court and keep your wits about you. The one who is in charge has wide-ranging responsibilities. For the porch where justice is done must be kept true to the law, and all proceedings must remain as straight as a plumb line. It is the Unter who gives the magistrate his seat, which certainly won't be won by anyone relying on favors. I wonder how often people had to go to court in those days.
Wow. I think that's very interesting. We don't necessarily think about court as something that occurs in ancient times. We always think of it, we see Law and Order in our heads. But in actuality, even the format for court today probably comes from ancient Kemet. We see the predecessor of the jury, or trial by jury. We see the predecessor of the whole concept of justice coming from Ma'at, that Lady Justice is an archetype of Ma'at. Ma'at is the archetype of Lady Justice. And so I think that's very interesting as well. It's profound that he even has suggestions on how to behave in court. And you would kind of assume that people would know how to behave in court, but I don't think that that's necessarily true. Sometimes people don't know how to represent themselves, and he's talking about how to be calm and how to present yourself according to the way that would be most favorable to the judge. He even says that judge has been given that role by divine authority. I don't know if I always agree with that these days, because that justice in our system tends to be just us sometimes. But it is important for us to look at the justice system and say, how can this individual who is in court get the best outcome by presenting themselves in the proper way? So I think that's interesting that he even told us about how to behave in court.
What I thought was interesting is that he's not even talking about whether your reason for court was due to something that you did or did not do. It's just sometimes you may end up having to go to court for whatever reason.
That's right.
This is what you need to do.
He says if you find yourself in court, if you happen to go to court, this is what you need to do. And I think that's very interesting as well.
Maxim 14, on the proper attitude towards fortune and the workings of the heart. In a varied group of people, be sure to make trustworthy allies to show that you yourself are someone worthy of trust. A person who conquers other people's hearts cannot be a hypocrite. The one who is not a slave to material goods can acquire possessions, provided he keeps in mind that he wants them only for a specific purpose. He can then responsibly become capable of leadership, a rich man acting to bring his plans to fruition. Without boasting, he will get a good name. He will be nourished. He can take care of those closest to him, and people will speak well of him without his knowing it. But he who obeys the impulses of his greed loses his own conscience and provokes disdain rather than love. He will have to endure the bleakness of a dry heart and a shriveled body, and his body shall not be anointed with oil. For a dry heart goes with an exhausted face. Both are the result of deeds done against conscience. A big heart in a man or woman is a gift from the Unter. But he who gives in the flames of base passion is punished by the Unter and will be overcome by his own inner enemy. It seems like Ptahhotep really focuses on the idea that you must be humble and not succumb to greed and gluttony. And he repeats that several times in his maxims, as if that is one of the worst crimes that you can commit in humanity.
Right, and that our accumulations end up driving us instead of development, inner development driving us. And I think that the concept of having an inner enemy is also very interesting as well. It gets back to the whole concept that you are a divine being and that all these properties and principles exist within you. But let's be clear that some of those properties and principles, the principle of chaos is also a divine property. When we see the image of Set, some people say Set is evil. And then they get confused when they see Set carrying an Ankh. They get confused when they see Set tying the knot of Smai Tawi with Heru, and Heru being the symbol of the divine authority of the Inter on earth. The force of God have you, if you want to use that phrase, that term, on earth. And they say, well, how could Set be evil and do this together? How could some of these rulers in this period that Kemet is a great nation, how could they name themselves after said? And we have to remember that those things are divine as well. But the question is, will you be in balance? And so that we do have internal enemies. You know, I recollect the image of the great Amonkhet, or what some people have misnomered as the Sphinx, and the ability for, which really speaks to our ability to overcome those urges, those animal urges, which drive us. He talks about how passion is something that can lead us down the wrong road. And so it's important for us to recognize that the path to spiritual development is one that takes discipline.
And how to channel that passion in the right direction.
Yet that discipline is also something that your ka leads you to, that your soul that leads you to as well. So he talks also about this concept of a conscience. And I think that, that your conscience actually, some of the earliest descriptions of a conscience come from ancient Kemet, particularly because they thought that their description for that part of you that encodes all of your divinity, that encodes all those things that you have done that are appropriate and guides you, they symbolize as the heart.
Maxim 15, on the art of communicating. Convey your instructions, aware of their importance, without leaving anything out, and give your opinion in your master's council room. If he accepts your arguments and adopts them as his own, it will not be difficult for you to transmit an exact message. Then no one will ask you ironically, who has the right information? As for the Great One, with his long experience, he would be misguided and unjust to punish a messenger who conveys his thoughts correctly. Therefore, the master will be silent after concluding, "That is what I said."
Once again, how to speak to someone who is powerful is conveyed here as well. He talks about how to give good counsel in many ways, and how to make sure that your words are impactful to those who you respond to, who you are being supervised by, in a sense. And so I think that that's important as well, for us to think about how we speak to those people.
I think this is a difficult one for people, especially when you have the concept of the ego. You know, so many people want to believe, I mean, all of us are guilty of it, that we know more in some instances than our own supervisors, and would like to be able to share that, but then have to remember that you have to humble yourself, because yet again, they are your supervisors. So it makes communication somewhat difficult, because you want them to understand what you're capable of, and for them to not just view you as the subordinate. But to some extent, your ego can surpass you to a point where you completely lose all ability to convey your conscious, or your, I guess, your skill. Because the first skill that you need to learn is how to actually talk to your supervisor before you can even show them the other skills that you're capable of.
I think it's interesting that he talks quite a bit about how to speak to a supervisor. Think of this almost as a young man who has just completed college. And so you're giving, Ptahhotep is almost giving this person sort of all of the gems that he's accumulated, the spiritual wisdom that he's accumulated over the years. And so, of course, he's going to talk about how you speak to people who are in power, because that's clearly not a position that most young people find themselves in. But this is not something that only young people should think that they'll get some divine wisdom from. And all of us have to speak to people who, for some reason or another, we have to respond to. It might not be a supervisor. It could be
a parent.
It could be a parent. It could be
an elder.
Whoever has something that you need. Let's be clear. How do you speak to them? How do you give them wise counsel? He does say that it's important to articulate your own ideas. He does. It seems like he's saying that's very important, that you have to know how to speak to people. And so here he's giving another tip as to how we should speak to folks who are in power. These could easily be described as wise teachings for those who are in the world of business. And I think it's interesting that these are, once again, over 4,000 years old, and this man is giving us business advice that still rings true today.
Maxim 16, on the art of governing. If you are guiding others, may your leadership go far thanks to the fairness of your orders. You must carry out carefully chosen acts that benefit the spirit. You must consider their future consequences carefully. And remember that an issue cannot be resolved in the midst of a concert of praise. Disfavor arises as swiftly as a crocodile's attack. Therefore, be careful to maintain control by keeping good order.
What are your thoughts on this one?
Well, everything needs to be in ma'at. You need to balance yourself and make sure that you're showing a good example. And without that good example, you don't have the balance. You're not able to be fair to others. If you're not setting that good example to them, then there's really nothing that they can learn from you.
Once again, I think that and I guess this is a little bit off topic, but another important point, sometimes people look at ancient Kemetic spirituality, and even those who practice ancient Kemetic spirituality today, and they say, this is blinding array of animals, are you worshiping animals? And once again, we're hearing him discuss animals as symbolic because of the way they behave. And I think that we have to recognize that this is all symbolism. So this is the second time he's mentioned the crocodile, actually. So, and once again, as these keys to leadership are some other things that he talks about here. So he's not just telling you, keep in mind that we talked a lot about Ptahhotep's advice on how to deal with people who are powerful. But he also gives lots of advice about how you should behave when you are in power. You know, I think that when I was in getting my master's degree, we called it legitimated authority. You know, those leaders who are leaders because they deserve to be leaders. Those leaders who use their leadership and their power righteously instead of using it to prevent people from feeling like they're human. And so I think, once again, he's talking about how we should be divine leaders, and divine leadership is critically important to go to be able to get ahead in the business world. And so, once again, he's giving some really great advice to someone who is starting out in the world. But definitely think about all those times that you have people that respond to you. Do you actually do whatever you want and then tell them that they can't do those things? Do they see tons of contradictions in what you're saying? Does it seem like you're willing to take off early but not let them take off early? Or, you know, do you take off whenever you want? Do you take vacation whenever you want and then tell people that they can't? I mean, these are all things that we know that supervisors do because they can. You know, and I think that it's something that we need to keep in mind. Whenever people are in power, sometimes they let that power run away with them. And they do whatever they want just because they're in power. And so Ptahhotep is saying, if you are a leader, make sure that you are doing what is right, because what those people think of you is important.
Exactly. Maxim 17, on the need to listen to petitions. If you are in the position of guidance and leadership, listen calmly to what the petitioner says to you. Don't turn him away before he has quite finished speaking or explained everything he wanted to say. Anyone oppressed by injustice wants above all to unburden his heart, more even than resolving the issue he came to see about. That will make him the happiest of supplicants and give him more pleasure than a public resolution of his case. As for the one who automatically turns petitioners away, people will wonder what reason he has for doing so. Of course, not all petitions can be granted, but a proper hearing gives satisfaction to the plaintiff.
Talking about being equitable once again, I hear. How many times have you asked for something, particularly in our hugely bureaucratic modern world? How many times have you asked for something and you know that you're going to be denied simply because denial is what happens when you ask for something? How many times have you gone to a government office and asked a question, a simple question, instead of getting an answer, they point to a sign? You know, how many times has that happened to you? He talks about the importance of listening to people. And that sometimes, even though you're going to tell them things that they don't want to hear, treating people fairly is extremely important. I know that in my own career, there have been times that I've had to fire people. And I think that whenever you're in a position of power, sometimes that has to happen. And one of the things that I think, there are tons of things that I've done wrong that I say, well, I could have done this better. How could I have been a better leader in this instance? But I think that one of the things that's interesting to me is whenever I think about the challenges of leadership, I think about those times that I had to fire people and that I hoped I dealt with them with some dignity. And I hope that I was fair. Some of those people that I fired actually ended up still being in contact with me, which I think is very interesting. I think it might be a mark of something that I did well. And so it's one of the things that I cherish about my leadership. And so listening to people is helpful. Sometimes there are some things that you won't be able to do, but at least be part of a conversation with these people, have a dialogue with people.
I mean, I think it just boils down to simple, customer service. You don't always have the resolution that people are looking for, but how do you end the conversation with them in a way that they still feel that they were helped? Or maybe they were able to come up with their own resolution. Sometimes it's not about you always giving the person the answer, but helping them find their own answer. So I think, if we can learn how to do that more often as opposed to humiliating people or just ignoring them because we don't have the answers to their questions, we can make things a little bit easier for them.
Right. It's important you brought up customer service. It's one of my pet peeves. I honestly believe that
Not
customer
more so
service.
for you than it is for me.
I think customer
and I work
service.
For the state.
Well, I honestly think that customer service is almost a lost art. People don't talk to you when they're helping you. Sometimes they do whatever they do. Even if they're trying to help you, they don't even know how to help you. So I know I've been in front of someone at a counter somewhere in some office, and I've asked for assistance. The person's mumbling. When I have to ask what they're saying, they get upset that I'm asking what they're saying. Even when they're helping me, they don't know how to help. And I think that customer service is something that we need to bring back into existence. And once again, he's talking about how to speak to people when they need something from you.
Exactly. Okay. Maxim 18, on the dangers of seduction. It sounds dangerous. If you want to maintain friendship in a house where you are welcome as a master, brother, or friend, or anywhere where you are made at home, beware of getting too close to the women or touching them. Where that happens, things are not right. The gaze of a man who is a trusted visitor in someone else's house is never innocent enough when he looks at women. Thousands of men have spoiled their lives by falling into the trap of seduction. What one takes at first to be delicate porcelain can turn out to be as hard as marble.
Wow.
A brief dreamlike moment of pleasure will bring you to a bad death for having given into a seductress. Don't behave frivolously. Those who do suffer grievous loss. Such behavior is certainly not profitable and brings nothing good. A man who takes on his rival in love risks making a serious mistake, perhaps even committing a crime. Besides, it is bad policy to encourage an attack of one's rival. On the point of doing so, conscience must intervene. Don't behave like this. It is loathsome behavior. And any way you can, thus spare yourself daily suffering. The man who constantly misbehaves, lusting after seductive women, will find his plans do not work out, whereas the man who manages to overcome his lust, all his plans will succeed. Is this loaded or what?
Is there anything that we have to say about that one? Good night. That's a great show. It's a wonderful show. The series is over. That one was wonderful. Can you imagine that 4,400 years ago, this man is talking about succumbing to passion and lust in the world of work or in someone's home as you're a guest in someone's home? How many times have we seen over the years great leaders who were undone by undoing their pants? How many times have we seen great leaders fall because they had personal indiscretions? In fact, I think that to some degree, some of those personal indiscretions are even more sexy and more interesting to people than other things that they've done. I know certainly as we looked at we have to talk about Clinton and the Monica Lewinsky situation because it's probably the largest one that we can think of. But as you look at that one, there were some things that I disagreed with that administration on vehemently, and I really didn't think that his affair with this woman was the most important thing that we should be focusing on. But think about how much time we spent on this affair. We didn't even think about all the other things that were going on because we were focusing on that. This is some of the most important information that you can give to a young person. This is some of the most important information you can give to an old person. Make sure that you don't, I think that in the vernacular they say don't doo-doo where you eat. And you know that we don't usually use the word doo-doo? He said so many things about doing it as well. He said that if you are seducing or you are done in by a seductress, what you think is porcelain can be hard marble. So you think that this is all wonderful, but in a moment things will turn in a very ugly direction. He's also talked about the fact that there may be someone else that's interested in that woman or connected to that woman. And so what you're doing, it's a bad idea to provoke adversaries. There's so many different ways that he goes in this particular one. He's covered all the ground. He's covered all the ground. I'm even taken, I remember, and someone who actually used to actually do security for Martin Luther King told me once, and I don't know whether this story is true, but it was an older man who I respect that told me that he was with King at a speech where King told him that he received some pictures of some indiscretions that he had from probably either the FBI or the CIA. It's probably COINTELPRO. And these pictures were going to be used to do one of two things, either to force him to commit suicide, this is what actually our government was doing, or to make sure that they were able to control him. And so what he did was he went in front of the audience and told everybody about what he did and talked about the fact that he's a man and he's not more than a man. And that the task that he's doing is not one that makes him any better than anyone else. And I think about how difficult that must have been to do. And I'll tell you that I'm sure at that time he wished he hadn't done it. It's so important for us to remember that these indiscretions always seem to end up in a negative manner.
Well, you have instances where Patterson and his wife tried to clear the air and put it out there, but went too far and probably gave us too much information to the point where, again, you lose focus on what's important. I mean, the bottom line is, again, having control of the lower self. You know, when you're having your battle, your internal battle of Heru and Set, trying to make sure that Heru always wins in the end. Because Set will fight as hard as possible to get you to overturn that. And
in this instance, you're talking about Set being those animal urges, lust, and all those other things. That, folks, be clear that those animal urges are not negative. They have to be placed in balance. And so when you let them run away, when you let the lower portion of your being run away with itself, you are doing things that will never have positive results. And so you have to make sure that the higher portion of your being is in control. Once again, think of the image of the great ancient statue of Ankhet, the Sphinx, where you see this large recumbent lion, one of the most difficult animals to tame. You know, it has this unbridled force, and it is one of the most powerful creatures on earth too, laying down. And there being this huge human head with these divine crowns at its top. The head is much smaller than the rest of the body. We're talking about the refinement of the upper portion of our being. That's the reason why it's smaller. It's almost being chiseled away from the rest of the animal urge. And so once again, we're talking about making sure that you are in control of your animal force. We've seen so many people become undone by it. I mean, we go down a litany.
I know.
The whole show could just be the litany of that.
Tiger Woods has heard enough.
Oh, my goodness. But I mean, folks, keep in mind that this wisdom comes to us thousands and thousands of years ago. Can you imagine that there probably were comparable stories in those days of people who had let their animal force get away with them? Mm-hmm. What would have happened if some of our leaders actually had read this earlier? Maybe they might have said, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Mm-hmm. Very, very interesting.
And, you know, some people might look at it and say, well, back then there was, polygamous relationships, so how could someone be righteous and, fight their urges? But again, during that time, there were also rules within the polygamous relationships. Mm-hmm. And that you could, I'm sure for those of you today who are watching Big Love, you see the conflict within the marriage where some things are considered adultery and some things are not. The wives are on a schedule. They are with their husband on certain nights, and that's their private time. And if another wife enters during that night, then that's an invasion of that private time, and that's considered adultery within the polygamous relationship. Mm-hmm. So there are even rules within that, concept of society based on how the Kemites were living. But this is particularly for rulers. Mm-hmm. Most of Kemetic society didn't believe in polygamous relationships, but the rulers, in order to keep royal blood within the family, and to also make sure that all women were taken care of, were to have these relationships, but had to abide by rules. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are very clear rules for any sort of relationship, every sort of marriage. And he'll talk more about marriage a little bit later on as well. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's very, very interesting that he's saying, men, keep control of yourselves because you can be undone. Now, keep in mind, women, that we're not letting you off the hook. We're not letting you off the hook. Mm-hmm. Because I'm sure that many of those individuals who were involved in those relationships wish that they never were as well. Mm-hmm. I know that the young lady who had the misfortune to have dealings with New York's recent Governor Spitzer, actually probably regrets ever being involved with him because her whole life is now changed and altered. Mm-hmm. Think about Monica Lewinsky. I know that there was a point where she said that she had actually come to grips with what she had done and actually is now living a very comfortable life. But her name will be spoken for generations. Mm-hmm. And so this is something that we should all consider.
Okay. I think we had too much fun with that one.
Wow. You talk about that one forever.
I know.
Now, folks, when we said that these were comprehensive, did you actually think that we were going to deal with that? We were not joking when we said that these rules were going to be comprehensive. Mm-hmm. And so definitely you've gotten a good taste of it there.
Maxim 19, on greed and incurable sickness. If you want to behave well, free yourself from the grip of all evil and fight any sign of greed. Greed is an incurable, fatal sickness with no remedy. It infects fathers, mothers, and mothers' brothers. It separates wife from husband. Greed is the coming together of all kinds of evil and contains everything that is hateful. A man can be balanced only if he follows the rule of Ma'at properly and treads his path carefully. He must reckon upon his wealth with no sense of greed, while the greedy man will have no resting place to give him access to the other realm.
Now, doesn't this sound a little bit like the challenge of a rich man getting into heaven? I believe there's a section in the Bible that says that it's easier for a camel to walk through the eye of a needle. He talks about how a greedy man has no access to the other realm, and that a greedy man must remain, that to be divine is to be in ma'at and to be in balance. He says a lot about greed here. And so with all of the descriptions and discussions about folks who are greedy, think about what he's referring to. Don't just say, oh, this is about greed again. Greed manifests itself in so many different ways. And so I think that he wants to be very clear that if we live our lives like that, we will not enter the hall of Ma'ati. We will not go into this, as some of you may consider, heaven, we will not be divine, and that you have to make sure that you're doing work, and that which you receive is that which you've earned.
But he also talks a lot about how it destroys families. You know, even though this may be a little bit off topic, it makes me think of a book I just read by a good friend of ours who's on the show, Nicole Sharp. She just released her book the end of November, where she talks about an instance of domestic violence where her father actually killed her mother, and she ended up being taken care of by her grandparent. But at that point, her family took advantage of the situation and decided that any money that she received through Social Security or any trust funds, they would ravish it. And she was left with nothing. And how it tore the family apart, where, you know, her grandparent actually pit her sister and her against each other, and how she would hide money from them or steal their mail or just take so much from them. And it really just shows how someone can really forget their loved ones and forget the fact that they need their loved ones at that point. You know, Nicole really needed her family, and this was a point where they forgot all about her and focused simply on their greed.
He really does also talk about how difficult it makes family life. I mean, I think that that's powerful, that he talks about greed in the workplace. He talks about greed when you're dealing with other people. He even talks about greed at home. It's very important for us to think about all those things that we think we need, and how it actually separates us from the divine. And so I think you're right to connect this to Sister Nicole's important book.
Maxim 20, on the right attitude towards acquisitiveness, on gentleness and violence. When it comes to sharing of riches, spiritual and material, don't be greedy. Take only what is rightly yours. Don't be greedy with your friends and family. A request from a gentle man has greater value than the same request from a violent one. The latter is given very little by his friends and family, since he has to go without the benefits that dialogue can bring. A little greed is enough to transform someone calm and collected into someone quarrelsome.
Once again, he's talking about greed, but from another angle. And I think that we should actually look at the glyphs and see what the difference is in the glyphs that he's using here, because it's being translated as greed, but he's saying something quite important here. I think that he's talking also in many ways about giving of yourself, and not thinking that, I think that we live in a time that we live deficiencies. We think of things being finite. We don't think of them as being, we don't think of love as being something that is infinite. We don't think of our time as being something that's infinite. We don't think about all those things that we can give to other people that are very important. Then we always want to keep them for ourselves. And so when he's talking about greed here, he's not talking about theft and graft and taking things that aren't yours. He's talking about not giving those things that are yours. And that is also greed. And I think that we need to just remember that to give is divine.
But also how to request or how to ask for things is important to him as well. You know, he talks about a man who is gentle has greater value than one who's violent. So, you know, depending on how you ask for these items is also important.
That's right.
How you project greed upon someone else.
That's right. That's right. Well, we've hoped you've enjoyed this discussion of the maxims of Ptah-hotep. We've gotten through Maxim 20. We have 17 more to go. Probably be about 2 other shows. And we probably won't have those shows this season. We think that we'll probably do those in season 4, so that we'll give you an opportunity to hear some other things, and we'll cover some other issues, have other guests on the show. But this will give you an opportunity to make sure that you pick up this book. And if you're not picking up the book, go online, search for the Maxims of Ptah-hotep. have this be a dialogue with us. We're hoping that one of the things that you'll do is you will begin to go through these and think about these on a daily basis. Think about how you'll be able to apply these to your life. And certainly, you've heard our interpretation of these divine rules. I'm sure there are others that you're thinking of. Let us know what you're thinking of in terms of using and applying these wonderful rules in your own lives, and how they resonate in different parts of the world and in different parts of the universe that we inhabit. And so make sure that you contact us and talk to us about how we can return to the grace that our ancestors provided us with by following their example.
Teachers, it's really important for you to pick up a copy of this book and go through it with your students in class. I mean, it's critical to start this type of teaching early with young minds to make sure that they're absorbing this and being able to practice this throughout their lives as they grow up into competent adults. But with that, hopefully you're following us on Facebook, you're reading our blog, The Ujat. We're out there in many cities now. We're branching out into the Bronx, and it will start airing on Thursdays in the Bronx at 4 p.m. In Atlanta, as of June 22nd, our time
right. We have a time change, but I don't know if we should tell them the time change now, because it may even change by the time you see this.
Okay.
But definitely, we're aired in a number of different cities, and if you really want to be able to figure out when we're going to be airing, make sure that you go to our website.
And that's www.comediclegacy.com, where you can also find updates on our Facebook. Okay?
That's right. And so with that, as we always say, the divine force in us greets the divine force in you. Hetepu, Anku Jasaneb, life, strength, and health.
Twau, thank you.